Welcome to a new edition of The Perspective with Mike Sherbino and Julie Stautland. How's your focus lately? Studies reveal that the constant bombardment of information we receive every day through these little monsters we call cell phones, emails, texts, and social media do more than rob us of our attention and focus. They actually make us feel as if we're doing something wrong. When in fact, former Silicon Valley engineers say the digital universe with all its hearts, hugs, likes, and alerts is rigged to manipulate our attention and isolate us instead of bringing us together, making the constant and inevitable challenges of life more difficult to solve. Today on The Perspective, we put our cell phones away and get to listen in on Rachel Baribeau, who dedicates her life to helping people overcome odds through practical, biblical, tried and true methods, along with what she says is imperative in our chaotic world, reclaiming our God-given joy.
Glad you're with us today on The Perspective. I'm Mike Sherbino, and welcome, Julie Stautland.
Thank you.
Just in case people have forgotten your name.
I know.
So I just thought we'd have a little bit of fun at the beginning of the program today, but hopefully helpful fun. I want to talk this week about some annoying things that people do that kind of drive their friends away, and they often don't know it.
Right.
And I just thought, they say one of the things is we're boring.
Well, yeah, we hear that sometimes, and it has to do with how we choose to converse with one another. You know, are we looking each other in the eye? Are we just kind of dominating conversation and not letting the other person talk? What do you think, Mike?
I don't know. I just fell asleep while you were chatting at me.
Yeah, I saw that.
I think many times, though, we should just learn to pull back a little bit and not be so full of ourselves and invite other people into the conversation.
I think that's good advice.
Good advice. Thank you very much. And when you affirm the other person, then, hey, I want to talk to you even more because you actually like me.
Exactly.
So there's a few little things that going back and forth, right?
That's right.
It's kind of like on a first date, you're on your best behavior.
But it should be all the time.
All the time. Well, anyways, we have an exciting guest back again. I asked her if she would come back. Rachel Joy is with us today. I'm looking so much to our conversation together. It's going to be fun. Stay with us.
Yes.
We're glad you're watching The Perspective. Well, I'm excited today to have Rachel Joy Baribeau with us again. And when I say again, you know, when you invite someone back to a program the second time or even the third time, it's because they just bring a unique perspective to the program. And many of you know Rachel from her time when she was broadcasting with ESPN and the sports broadcaster and involved so much with what was happening in the college scene as well. And then something particular happened. And it began to shift her whole life, her narrative. And she started a movement called #Changing Your Narrative. And we're going to be talking again to Rachel right now. Rachel, welcome to the program. We're so glad you're back with us. Thanks for doing us the honor.
The honor is all mine. This is what we said in the pre-show. When you get invited back, it's the first time is something wonderful, but getting invited back is a whole nother realm. So thank you.
Hey, well, listen, as I was saying earlier, I got invited back, so maybe we shouldn't make too much of it, okay? But you know, as you get to know somebody a little bit more and more, and I'm intrigued with some of the different things that have shaped your life, and I'd love to hear it from your perspective. But I'm a football fan. Take me back to the story. I think it was back in 2016. The Clemson game. What was that all about, and how did that change you in particular?
Yeah, so I had just given my second I'm Changing the Narrative talk at Clemson, and I was really blown away because Dabo Swinney allowed me to address his team 14 days before the playoffs and they dismantled Ohio State en route to a national championship. 14 days. Now, listen, if you know anything about football, which you do, and a lot of your listeners and your viewers do, you know, some coaches are superstitious, some coaches are, but regardless of whether they're superstitious or not, they are bound to their schedule, right? And they know, okay, we're going to have this here, we're not going to have this here, we're going to allow this. They're very particular. And so the fact that this coach allowed me 14 days before such a pivotal time was a complete honor, okay? And the fact that he did not even ask for any notes. He didn't ask for what I was talking about. He completely trusted me because I came highly recommended by some of his assistant coaches. And so that was the talk. And then the national championship happened. And I was there covering it for the college football playoff. I was a host. And so I'm just kind of standing over by the tunnel after they win, soaking this all up. And all of a sudden, these players and these coaches come up to me and start screaming, "We did it!" They had their bracelets on. "We changed the narrative." And I'm like, "What? You remembered little old me? Like I made an impact on you?" And so that's kind of when I had an inkling, when God gave me an inkling of what this could be and how this could affect people long term. Yeah.
I mean, that's a great story. And just to fill in a couple more gaps for people, explain what it means when you say, "I'm changing the narrative." What is this all about?
Yeah, it's a movement. I mean, it's a way of life. I tell people this all the time. It keeps me honest. You know, if I'm mean to the person at the airport, the person checking me in, if I'm mean to my Uber driver, if I'm rude to this person, then I'm not being what I espouse, what I teach, what I go out and share with other people. So we talk about in the movement, I'm changing the narrative, good love for yourself so you can have good love for others. We talk about being a king, a queen, or royal every day of your life. We talk about when you screw up, because we're all going to screw up, making it right, saying you're sorry, going back and remedying that mistake, apologizing. We talk about mental health and soul care, taking care of your soul. And we talk about purpose beyond your job. You were not born to wish for Fridays and dread Mondays. There is more, my dear. There is more, my love.
Well, I'm glad you're saying that because, you know, when you came on the show about 2 months ago, Julie has changed 100% since she comes in here every day. So it's really worked. And sometime I'm going to listen to the rerun as well. But no, you got a question to ask, don't you?
You're terrible. Well, I just piggyback.
No, you're supposed to say he's wonderful.
He's wonderful. He's wonderful. Yes, of course.
And I'm not trying to make fun of it. I hear what you are saying. Yeah. How you speak to people can just change the climate so much. I could take us down a rabbit trail right now, but we want to hear from you.
And I know that we're talking about social media in the opener and that, but I think this is so important that you're changing the narrative and teaching people how to actually physically be in the real world and interact through conversation, through physical actions, and it's something that is so needed today. Do you have another story that you could share with us that has just really stood out to you, how that kind of input has like really clicked in somebody?
Yeah, I mean, I get messages. Here's how I know it works. And people say to me, "Oh, well, you know, it's interesting. I just left a school and somebody there said, you know, I'm a little bit leery of speakers because a lot of them just come and speak and they leave. That is not me, right? I believe in the talk is just the first step. I create relationships. I've seen babies be born. I've been to my king's weddings. They've been to my wedding. I keep up with kings and queens all over the country. I know their parents. I've created relationships. And so I just got a message the other day from a queen that I'd spoken to 6 months ago that said, "Miss Rachel, I still think about what you taught me. Here are my notes from that day. Here's how it has affected me. I'm doing so well. I'm in therapy. I'm loving myself." And guys, I get those messages every day and they are worth more than, and I say this, and I probably said it last time, but they're worth more than $1 million deposits into my bank account because they're priceless. They are life-changing. I tell people this. Tim Shaw, the youngest person diagnosed with ALS in the NFL, said this. He said, "Look, I can make you think and I can make you feel, but if you don't go out and do anything with it, it's for nothing." Exactly. So I encourage them. I give them takeaways. Because we've all been to speakers where we felt so great. And then 5 days later, you're back to your old self. So I'm all about takeaways so that you can implement it in your everyday life.
You see, when you talk about that, it makes me think of an illustration where we talk about when you put that pebble in the water and you think, I'm not making any difference, and yet that pebble has so many incredible ripples, and what you're starting to see is that ripple effect into people's lives, and it actually just keeps spreading as they continue to spread that into other people's lives, and that is what is lasting. That it's not like a paper just burned up. That is changing people's lives, not just one life, but several. I think that's incredible.
That's why I do this. And I very quickly, I had a reporter tell me one time, he said, "You don't get it, Rachel. You think you've affected one life in that room. But if one person breaks a generational cycle of abuse, of drug abuse, of physical abuse, changes the narrative in their life, then it's their grandkids and their grandkids and their grandkids, and you will never meet them, but you will have had an effect on their family." And that, when I thought about it, I sat in the car and I just cried happy tears, grateful tears. So absolutely, you nailed it.
Rachel, we want to expand on that more. I think what we're talking about now is this stuff that really, really matters. And I just want to say to our guests, stay with us. We're going to be right back after a short break.
I believe inside every one of us exists greatness. I believe inside every one of us exists limitless possibility. I want them to be able to look in the mirror and be proud of the person that's staring back at them.
For some of you, you will walk out of here and you will never, ever, ever be the same.
I'm the person that tells you you're not defective, you're not broken, you're not alone. It's for ages 6 to 96. All of us can be a king or queen. I don't care what you've done. I don't care where you've been. You are not too dirty. You're not too far gone. You're not too broken.
I started to love myself. I set the boundaries, I set the template, I set the flow, I set the temperature for how everybody else treated me and how my life went.
We're talking with Rachel Joy Baribeau, and it's been very exciting to hear how I'm Changing the Narrative has impacted so many people. And I know that there's also a little bit more behind this story of Rachel. And I'd like to talk about a story that happened to you on Mount Kilimanjaro. What came out of that life-changing, life-expanding, altering experience?
Yeah. So first of all, I am not a mountain climber. I'm not an athlete. I have spent my whole life, covering other people's athletic feats. And I am not, but my dear friend, Kevin Turner, was diagnosed with ALS. Mm-hmm. And I went to sleep one night on the couch and woke up, and it had to be a God-sized idea. I was watching a documentary on Kilimanjaro and I thought, that looks miserable. Who would want to do that? It's not even pretty. It looks like Mars. And I woke up the next day with the idea of climbing Kilimanjaro for my friend Kevin. And so several other amazing warriors joined, and we combined raised $80,000 for ALS research. Wow. And they made a documentary about it. But on the last day, at 17,000 feet, 19,341 feet is the elevation. On the last day, we took the hardest route up, because we thought if he has ALS, we can't take the easy route up. So we took the western front up. And on the last day, a blizzard hit. Everybody else on the mountain turned around. Our group went up. Multiple people fell. A gal fell, had to be ice axe arrested. The guide, she was so grateful. She put his kids through college, through school. I slipped and fell. And, people say to you, your life flashes before your eyes. For me, there was no time. It was it was just a guttural cry, and I slipped on my belly all the way down to the last person they had put on the climb that day because of the weather. Had he not been there, I would have just kept sliding. And there's no rescue. They just find you if they can and run you down on a metal cart. So almost dying on the top of Kilimanjaro put things in perspective, and I came down a different woman than I went up.
Wow, when I hear that story, those are moments that just reshape us. Mm-hmm. Take us how that impacted you, and even with what you're doing with I'm Changing the Narrative, and your own journey of faith with Jesus.
Yeah. Life becomes that much more precious. people become that much more precious. People say to me a lot, they're like, you're always happy. I'm like, no, I'm not always happy, but I do have a joy. It is my middle name, but I do have a joy that comes out of me, and it's God-given. And it is despite all of the circumstances and things that have happened in my life, I have chosen better, not bitter. Better, not bitter. And it seems so simple, guys, but it's so true. It is a simple decision that we can choose. Okay, I lost my job. Okay, I'm going through a divorce. Okay, I'm broke, but I'm getting better. I'm sick, but I'm healing. I am down, but I'm climbing. I have failed, but I'm going to learn. Bitter or better. We get to choose in every situation.
You've also said something else, Joy, Rachel. I want to call you Joy right now. Anyways, Rachel. Yeah, so I got names people call me as well. But anyways, what was I going to say? Yeah, you were talking about how there is no such thing as coincidence. And especially on the last program, you mentioned that. And I understand that in a perspective, but share with me your perspective on why you say that. There's no such thing as perspective. And how does that impact the people that you're teaching and pouring yourself into?
Right.
Yeah. So I read it in a book by Kathy Lee Gifford, The Jesus to Me, or My Jesus. I'm blanking on the title, but it's recent. And my bonus daughter gave it to me for Christmas. It was so precious. She handed it to me and she said, I know you're writing a book. Maybe you could get ideas from these books. And I was, my heart was just overwhelmed with love because I had not been a mom before, being a bonus mom to these kids. And so I started to read it. And in one of the chapters, she says, in the Hebrew language, there's no word for coincidence. And I've always thought that. I've always thought the little old lady you meet at the grocery store who's widowed and doesn't have anybody or any interaction, that gets dressed up and you meet her at the exact time you're there to tell her she's beautiful and hello and how are you? That was meant to be. The person you sit next to on the airplane. I know people that have gotten married and fallen in love. I had two people that met in one of my courses last year and are in love. They fell in love.
Wow.
So for me, there's just no coincidence.
Right.
And in everything, we were talking about in our pre-show meeting, and everything, even in suffering, there are lessons. In suffering, there are things that we can learn about ourselves, about faith, about life, about people, about perseverance. And I think it's so important to have that perspective.
And I think when you look at it that way, that there are no coincidences, then it makes every interaction so much more intentional. And that makes changing the narrative so much more intentional. And so beyond just our own social time and getting sucked into only social media, it means our personal interactions with people, they mean something. And that gives value to ourselves and value to others. And I think that's fantastic.
So, Rachel, so let me ask you this question. So when you get overwhelmed, building on what Julie has said, when it just hits you, what do you do?
I do a lot of things. And we teach in my movement the vast importance, and you'd be surprised the amount of males, let me speak to kings for a moment, that are never taught about self-care, we call it soul care in my movement, deeper. They don't know in an intentional way what fills their cup, what feeds their soul. And so I engage in self-care, whether that's a nap, reading, Bible, dancing, traveling, connecting with people, whatever that may be. I make sure that I take care of my soul, because it is so important to do that, because that then allows me to be the best Rachel I can be to everybody in the world. And I do want to say this really quickly. This is kind of crazy. In every situation, you are either depositing into somebody's life or you're withdrawing. So every interaction you have at the gas station, the grocery store, the airport, your family, the teacher, you're either depositing or you're withdrawing. And here's the way I look at it. I don't know how long I have on this planet. I'd like to live another 60 years, but I don't know what I'll have. And so I'm determined to make deposits into people's life. And when I screw up, I am determined to fix it and say, I'm sorry, I messed up. And I have made those phone calls before. I've called factories and tried to locate a Kim. I've called back to a clothing store during the pandemic and said, a catalog clothing company said, I apologize. And the woman was shocked. And so none of us are perfect, but when you screw up, you mess up, you own it.
Oh, Rachel, you have totally challenged me. I'm going to hang on to that, depositing instead of withdrawing.
Yeah, that's so good. Rachel, thank you for being with us again. And as much as you're pouring into people's lives, you've poured into us today, we just want to encourage you to just keep pressing on. And we thank God for you.
Thank you. That means everything to me. That's my go juice. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being with us. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back with Mike's Word.
We talk about being a king, not on the football field, a king with your word, with your time, with your effort, with your character. There's nothing greater than calling somebody a king or queen and helping them find their purpose and watching their soul rise up to it.
She changed the life of our players about mental health awareness, how to treat women like queens, not like how our society says through music, but queens.
I got to host the first ever mental health game between two Big Ten teams, Maryland and Minnesota. There was one person in the stadium that didn't feel alone. There was one person in the stadium that said that big bad football player can talk about his mental health and take off the mask and destroy perfect. Then I can do that.
You start to follow your track record, all of the downfalls that you felt and all the painful moments that you had to endure. But then you look back and say, wait a minute, I'm here right now though. I'm relevant in my spirit. My soul is bursting to just share.
When I see the light bulb go on in somebody's soul, you start to walk it, talk it, live it. You start to live by that standard.
If you hear the phrase messy lives, what jumps into your mind? You're thinking of somebody else, the person down the street, maybe somebody that you look like. Hopefully that's not the case, but maybe it's somebody that you know. But could it be you? What does that look like? What does that mean when our lives are messed up? I've heard that expression said many, many times. And I ponder it, and I guess I've been guilty of using it as well when I'm describing some other people. But I don't often want to take a look inside of me. And I love the teachings of Rachel today and what she shared with us, just her genuineness and her transparency as she's talking about life and how we need to change our narrative. You and I can do that as we know the power and presence of Christ in our lives. You don't have to stay where you are. And today I want to begin a series of teaching out of the Old Testament story of the book of Ruth. Ruth comes to us as a story that paints a picture of people that were living in a place that was supposedly right where they were supposed to be, but in Bethlehem, the house of bread, there was a famine. And while the famine was going on, the ruling family of the group that Elimelech was of, who is that guy? Well, we're going to hear about him in just a moment. He knew better, but he decided to make a bad choice when times are tough. And folks, there will always be tough times in your life and mine. The question is, how are we going to choose to navigate those times? Maybe you're in one of those moments right now. It could be a sickness you're dealing with, financial pressure. You just might feel like, the stress is more than I can bear. But in that moment, and maybe the moment that you're in right now, I want you to think about some things you need to do to avoid getting in a mess. We'll talk more about Ruth and we'll unpack the story more over the coming 2 weeks in our study together. But I've jotted down 5 reasons why people often get in a mess. And it seems that all of these things come out of the book of Ruth, things that we'll see. But you know, one of the first things that causes me to get into a mess is when I lose my temper. You know, I lose my patience. Bingo. It's as simple as that. And think about how many times you've got into a messy relationship, or you've offended somebody, you've hurt a son or a daughter, or maybe your spouse, because you shot off at the hip when you should have left your lips zippered tight. You know, it says in Proverbs 15, verse 18, a patient man calms a quarrel. Let's ponder that one. A patient man calms a quarrel. Oh, to be having our tongue under control. That is so key. That is so important. And that's one of the first reasons we get in a mess. But secondly, sometimes we get in a mess because we are just determined to fix things my own way. In the story of Ruth, there is a man, his name was Elimelech, and he had a wife whose name was Naomi, and he had two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Interesting meaning in the names. The idea of Elimelech, the dad, meant that God is king. But the problem was, he wanted to be the king rather than God. And so he decides to fix things his own ways. He decides to disobey God and go down to the country of Moab where there's no famine. But God has said, don't go there, don't go there. And as a result, he lost his life, his sons died. My goodness, there was hell to pay for. And many times we get in a mess when we're determined to fix things our way. Could that be you? Oh, you can smile, and we all know there's many good things about a strong-willed child, and that determination, we want to encourage that, but many times that can take us down a wrong road. And why we get in a mess is because we're determined to do it our way. I think sometimes we get in a mess when we respond to fear. And I wonder today if fear has gotten hold of your life. And many times the decisions you and I make, if it's out of fear, is going to get us into a greater mess. That's why Paul said in 2 Corinthians 5:7, we live by faith and not by sight. Because sometimes what we're looking at can simply be overwhelming. And then there are another very simple reason why we get in a mess. It's when we willfully choose to disobey God. And in the story of Ruth, we see in the opening chapters different people choosing to disobey God, and things just got worse and worse. Could that be you? Could that be you? And God is saying, hey, listen, it's time to change things, time to write a new narrative, time to walk in obedience. And then at other times, we get into mess because it's just the reality of life. It's the reality of trials. And we need to know this, because I think for most of us, as we deal with trials, God is saying, I want to walk with you through the thick and through the thin. I want to be your strength, your very present help in trouble. And so while it might seem like a heavy mess, know this, that God is walking with you. He will be with you. He has not neglected you. He is going to be your refuge and your strength, your strong tower, your hope in the midst of those hard times.
As we talk about breaking through life's constant challenges, two things I want to leave with you. Be better, not bitter, and there is no coincidence. God works through everything we say and do. He loves you. Be with us tomorrow as we share God's word again.